This happened literally yesterday. I honestly don't think I've fully processed it yet. Me, 19F, and my friend, 19F, were biking home around 3 a.m. on a dimly lit street right next to our house. On one side of the road was forest, completely pitch black beyond the tree line. On the other side were houses. From far away, we spotted a red car parked ahead with one broken headlight. As we got closer, the car slowly started moving past us. Then it made a U-turn and drove past us again. Even in the dark, it was obvious we were two girls alone at night. So we created some distance between us and the car. When we reached the sidewalk, we noticed a girl standing partially hidden behind a white truck. She was watching that same red car. The car was creeping toward her. Then she suddenly ran, off the sidewalk and onto a bike path that cuts through the forest. Immediately, two men got out of the red car and followed her into the woods. We decided to follow them and try to help her. I live next to that forest. I know how dark it gets. No one walks that path without a flashlight unless they have a reason. And even then, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. The slow footsteps, the guy in the bucket hat, the way the car just disappeared, it all felt wrong. When we reached the entrance to the path, we saw the red car just sitting there. The driver, a guy wearing a white bucket hat, looked directly at us, then sped off down the street. The path was completely pitch black. We walked in with a fence on one side and dense forest on the other. That's when I heard slow, deliberate footsteps keeping pace with us. They were too heavy to be an animal. We kept walking until my friend spotted the girl ahead of us. She shined her flashlight and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The girl looked over her shoulder at us. She stared for a moment with this unreadable, unsettling expression. Then she took off running deeper into the darkness. That's when our survival instincts finally kicked in. Questions, and one patrol car drove down questions, and one patrol car drove down the forest path. About 5 minutes later, they came back and showed us a photo of the girl. They said they had found her with one man, which didn't make sense, because less than 10 minutes earlier, we had seen her completely alone, running away. They also said neither of them would identify themselves or explain why they were there. Then they brushed us off and told us we could go home. As we walked away, we saw 3 people get into a police car, which made it even stranger because earlier they said there was only one guy with her. So was someone really following us in the woods? I keep thinking, what if this was some kind of trafficking bait? Maybe the only reason they didn't come after us was because we started screaming. About an hour ago, I was driving a friend home from the hospital. She's elderly and had gone in a few days earlier after a fall. To get her back to her apartment, we had to pass through a part of town. That's a little sketchy. Not usually terrible, just not the best area. It was pretty late, so the roads were quiet. In my city, it's not unusual to see homeless people, tweakers, or just generally odd individuals walking around at night. Usually, they're not aggressive. If they approach you and you ignore them, they move on. We were about 5 minutes from her apartment when we stopped at a red light. A man started crossing the street in front of us from the left. Normally, that wouldn't be a big deal, but the second I noticed him, something felt off. Before I even said anything, my friend said, "I have a bad feeling about that guy." That just confirmed what I was already thinking. He stopped directly in front of my car and stared at us. Then he started yelling, seemingly for no reason, pointing at us and throwing his hands up. I couldn't hear what he was saying because the windows were up and the radio was on. We were both scared at that point. I was ready to hit the gas if things escalated. I didn't want to run him over, but I was prepared to if I had to. What stuck with me was that he didn't look like the typical tweaker you see wandering around at night. He was dressed normally, clean t-shirt, jeans, and looked well groomed. Just an average-looking guy in his 40s. After about 15 seconds of yelling, he kept walking. I assumed he was finishing crossing the street and would leave us alone, but instead he suddenly sprinted toward the front passenger door where my friend was sitting. He grabbed the handle and tried to open it. He even hit the window. In that moment, I decided to run the red light. The street was completely empty, so I felt safe doing it. I looked in my rearview mirror after driving through the light and saw him sprinting after us, but we were able to get away easily. We took a longer route home just to be safe. We made it back fine, just shaken up. My friend was more upset than I was, which is understandable. That honestly made me angrier than anything. She asked me to stay while she showered and got ready for bed, so I'm sitting on her couch writing this right now. I don't know if that guy was drunk, high, or just having a terrible day and decided to take it out on us, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I've never been in a situation like that before, and I don't know if I handled it perfectly. I'm just extremely grateful that I always lock my doors as soon as I get in the car. Before I start, please remember I was 20 years old and extremely naive. You can call me stupid. Honestly, I probably was. I know how lucky I am to even be here. I still beat myself up whenever I think about that day. I just want outside opinions. Maybe I'm wrong about him. This was about 20 years ago. I was walking down the street in a pretty rough area during the summer. I had on shorts and a tank top because of the heat. I was very thin back then, almost too skinny, and more than once people had mistaken me for a sex worker. I don't know if that detail matters, but it's part of the story. I was on my way to pick up my son from daycare when a truck full of men started catcalling me. They kept turning around, driving past, yelling things out the window. It was making me nervous. As I passed a gas station parking lot, a man around my age pulled up in a nice car and asked if I wanted a ride. He didn't seem scary. He was actually good looking. So I said yes and got in. He asked where I was headed. I told him it was about a mile straight down the same road. But instead of continuing forward, he drove the opposite direction and said he just needed to turn around. I didn't think too much about it. He started asking about my life, and I told him. I explained that I had just left a domestic violence situation and was staying at a women's shelter nearby. I mentioned that my movements were closely monitored and that I was about to pick up my son. Looking back, that detail might have saved me. At some point, I realized he made another wrong turn. I didn't know the area well, so when I questioned it, he said he was taking a shortcut. I just kept talking. Then I smelled something. Now I know what that smell was. At the time, I didn't. I turned around to check the back seat, thinking maybe there was spoiled food back there. The car was spotless, not a crumb anywhere. I mentioned the smell. He brushed it off and changed the subject, but it kept getting stronger. I asked again what it was. He said he didn't know. Maybe something he forgot to throw out that had gone bad. There was absolutely nothing in that car. Eventually, he dropped me off safely where I needed to go. He didn't tell me his name. He didn't ask for my number. He didn't give me his. I didn't think much of it until much later, when I smelled that same smell again. This time, I knew exactly what it was, and it instantly brought me back to him. This was around 2005 in Covington, Kentucky. I'm convinced the only reason I made it out of that car that day was because he knew I would be missed, and quickly. He knew my whereabouts were being tracked and that people would start looking for me almost immediately. True crime used to be one of my favorite genres. I loved reading about serial killers, stalkers, and all that stuff because it always felt distant. None of it had ever touched my life personally, but after this happened, it stopped feeling like entertainment. Now I notice red flags everywhere. During my sophomore year of college, I volunteered as a teaching assistant for an on-campus international student program in the Northeast. The program was basically the final step students had to complete to receive a certificate proving they were proficient in English. Students usually came in groups from the same countries. One semester, we might have mostly Chinese and Brazilian students, and the next, it would be Korean and Saudi students. That semester, there were a lot of students from Mexico. Most of them lived in an off-campus housing complex called the Suites. My role was informal since it was volunteer work. Some former program friends knew I wanted to teach English abroad someday, so they recommended me to the staff so I could gain experience. Because of how casual the position was, I didn't think twice about forming personal friendships with some of the students. A few of us are still friends to this day. At the time, I wasn't very outgoing. I had friends, but I rarely drank and had barely ever been to a party. When some of the students found that out, and they threw parties almost every weekend, they insisted I come to the next one. The party was actually really fun. It was mostly international students, which made it comfortable since I knew most of them. I got pretty drunk and somehow managed to have fluent conversations in languages I barely spoke. Everything was going great until a few of us stepped into a friend's dorm room to get some air. That's when a few girls checked their phones and realized Pamela hadn't come back from Main Street yet. No one could reach her. Pamela was a 19-year-old student from Mexico. Session was scheduled for 5 p.m., and shouldn't have gone past 7:30. It was 11:30 p.m., and no one had heard from her since 5:15, when she texted saying her phone was about to die, but she'd figure out a way home afterward. When I asked which teacher she was meeting with, they said Charles. The second they said his name, my stomach dropped.